The old truck coughed and sputtered as it bumped down the long, dusty dirt track, leaving Willow Creek Farm behind. Eliza May, known to everyone in the county simply as Ellie, stood on the sagging porch of the little farmhouse. She didn't wave, she didn't cry. Not yet. She just watched, her heart feeling like a heavy stone in her chest, as the truck and her husband Jedediah disappeared over the rise in the road. A cloud of reddish dust, the same color as the dry, tired earth all around, hung in the air for a moment, then slowly began to settle. Jedediah was gone. After 10 years of marriage, of trying to make a life on this stubborn piece of land, he had packed his old suitcase, the one with the broken latch, and left. He hadn't said much. Just a few mumbled words about needing to find something better, about a chance for a fresh start, somewhere far away from the endless dust and the failed crops. He hadn't looked her in the eye. Ellie wrapped her arms around herself, though. The morning air was already warm. The silence he left behind was huge. It pressed in on her from all sides, louder than any of Jedediah's booming laughs or his frustrated yells when things went wrong, which they often did. Willow Creek Farm wasn't a forgiving place. The creek it was named after was mostly a dry gully these days, and the willows along its banks drooped sadly, their leaves coated in dust. She walked slowly back into the small kitchen. Jedediah's coffee cup still sat on the table, half empty. A greasy plate with a few forgotten crumbs of toast was beside it. It was like he had just stepped out for a moment, but Ellie knew better. The note on the table, short and to the point, said it all. Gone to find my fortune. Don't wait up. Not even a sorry or a goodbye. A wave of cold anger washed over Ellie, quickly followed by a deeper, aching hurt. 10 years. She had given him 10 years of her life, worked her fingers to the bone beside him, trying to coax life from the parched soil. She remembered when they first married. Jedediah had been full of big dreams then, his eyes shining with plans for a prosperous farm, a happy home. Ellie had believed in those dreams, believed in him. But the land was hard, the weather harder, and Jedediah's dreams had slowly turned into restless frustration. He started talking more about leaving than about staying, more about finding quick riches than about the slow, steady work the farm demanded. Now, his restlessness had won. He was free, chasing some far-off rainbow, and she was left with the failing farm, the leaky roof, the barn that creaked with every gust of wind, and debts, so many debts. The thought of the banknotes tucked away in the biscuit tin made her stomach clench. Jedediah had never been good with money, always borrowing for some new scheme that never quite panned out. Ellie sank onto one of the rickety kitchen chairs. The flowered curtains she'd sewn years ago, now faded and thin, barely stirred in the still air. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, beating down on the dry fields. There were chores to do. The few scrawny chickens needed feeding. The small vegetable patch needed watering, if she could get enough from the spluttering well. But the will to move, to do anything, had drained out of her. What was the point? How could she possibly manage all this on her own? Despair, cold and heavy, settled over her. She thought of her mama, gone these 5 years now. Mama had been strong, practical. She would have known what to do. Papa, too, had been a fighter. He'd loved this land, rough as it was. But Ellie felt small and lost, like a child left alone in the dark. The hours crept by. The sun moved across the sky, pouring heat into the little house. Ellie didn't eat. She just sat there, the silence of the empty house echoing the emptiness in her heart. Old memories, both good and bad, flickered through her mind. Laughing with Jedediah as they painted the porch steps blue, the color now chipped and peeling. Arguing late into the night about his latest plan to buy a new piece of machinery they couldn't afford. The rare joy of a good rain, the smell of damp earth, the even rarer sight of a decent harvest. It wasn't all bad, she thought. There had been moments of hope, of closeness, but they were buried now, under years of disappointment and Jedediah's growing distance. He hadn't really been with her, truly with her, for a long time. Maybe his leaving was just making official what had already happened slowly, painfully over the years. As dusk began to settle, painting the dusty landscape in shades of purple and orange, a tiny spark flickered inside Ellie. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something more like stubbornness. Her mama hadn't raised a quitter, and this farm, this land, it was her home. Whether Jedediah was here or not, it was all she had. She stood up, her legs stiff. Her reflection in the dim, dusty window pane showed a woman she barely recognized, tired, pale, with sad eyes. But there was a firmness in her jaw that hadn't been there that morning. Jedediah was gone. That was a fact. But she was still here. And somehow she would have to find a way to go on. The first few days were the hardest. Every morning, Ellie woke up with a jolt, her hand reaching for Jedediah's side of the bed, only to find it cold and empty. The silence in the house was a constant companion, sometimes a suffocating blanket, sometimes a hollow echo. The farm, which had always felt too big and demanding even for two people, now seemed impossibly vast and overwhelming for just one. She started with the chickens. They were hungry, clucking impatiently as she finally emerged from the house, her eyes gritty from a restless night. Pouring out the feed, she felt a small sense of purpose. It was a tiny thing, feeding the chickens, but it was something real, something she could do. Next was the vegetable garden. Jedediah had mostly ignored it, calling it women's work, but Ellie had always found a quiet satisfaction in tending. The rows of beans, tomatoes, and squash. The well was nearly dry, the pump groaning in protest as she worked the handle, but she managed to haul up enough water to give the thirsty plants a drink. The sun beat down on her back and sweat trickled down her temples, but she kept going, her movements slow but steady. The fields of corn and cotton, Jedediah's pride, were another story. They were already withering under the relentless sun, the soil cracked and barren. He had planted late, hoping for rains that never came in enough measure. Ellie walked the edge of the fields, her heart sinking. There was nothing she could do. For them, not on her own, not without water. That dream, their dream of a bountiful harvest, was dead, just like so many others. Loneliness was a constant ache. The small town of Redemption was a few miles away, but Jedediah had never been one for socializing, and Ellie had few close friends. Old Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring farm sometimes waved from her porch, but her place was almost as struggling as Ellie's. Most folks in Redemption were kind, but they were also busy with their own lives, their own hardships. Ellie didn't want to be a burden, didn't want their pity. One afternoon, Mr. Silas Blackwood, the town banker, drove out to Willow Creek Farm. He was a stern-looking man with a prim suit and eyes that didn't miss much. He'd come about the loan, the one Jedediah had taken out for the new tractor that now sat rusting in the barn because Jedediah hadn't bothered with its upkeep. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, his voice polite but firm, not even calling her Ellie. "I was sorry to hear Mr. Cooper has departed." He made it sound like Jedediah had died, not just run off. But business is business. The next payment is due. Ellie stood straight, though her knees felt weak. "I know, Mr. Blackwood, I'll find a way." He looked around at the dusty yard, the peeling paint on the house, his expression doubtful. "The farm isn't in good shape, Mrs. Cooper. Hasn't been for a while. Perhaps it's time to consider other options." Ellie knew what he meant. Sell the farm. Give up. The thought sent a shiver of fear through her, but also a surprising surge of defiance. "This is my home, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not selling." He shrugged, a small, precise movement. "As you wish. But the bank will need its money." He tipped his hat and drove away, leaving Ellie with another heavy worry to add to her collection. Days turned into weeks. Ellie fell into a routine born of necessity. Wake before dawn, tend the chickens, water the garden, fix what was broken. Around the house, a loose shutter, a leaky tap. She learned to be resourceful. She patched Jedediah's old overalls, cooked simple meals from what her garden produced, and counted every penny. She discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to fix the sputtering well pump after watching Jedediah do it a few times, her hands greasy and her knuckles scraped. but a triumphant smile on her face when the water finally gushed out more steadily. She even managed to sell a few dozen eggs and some vegetables in town, enough to buy flour, sugar, and coffee. Each small victory was a tiny light in the darkness. But the shadow of the debt and the failing farm loomed large. The cotton and corn were a lost cause. The land was just too dry, too tired. She knew deep down that selling eggs and vegetables wouldn't be enough to save Willow Creek. One sweltering afternoon, as she sat on the porch, trying to catch a non-existent breeze, her gaze fell upon a patch of ground near the almost dry creek bed. It was an area they'd always avoided, a marshy, scrubby section where nothing useful ever grew. Jedediah used to say it was cursed ground. Lately, though, with the drought so severe, even that marshy patch looked drier than usual, just cracked mud and a few stubborn, ugly weeds. She remembered her papa saying long ago that sometimes the ugliest places held surprises. He'd been a bit of a dreamer himself, her papa, but a practical one. He'd always been curious about the land, what it held, what it could offer. An idea, vague and unformed, began to tickle at the back of Ellie's mind. Water. That was the farm's biggest problem. The well was failing. If only she could find another source of water. Maybe, just maybe, if she could dig deeper, or somewhere new. The thought was foolish, perhaps. She was one woman, with no proper tools for digging a new well. But the image of Mr. Blackwood's disapproving face, the thought of losing her home, pushed her. What did she have to lose by trying? The next morning, armed with an old shovel and a pickaxe Jedediah had left behind, Ellie walked towards that scrubby patch of land near the creek bed. The sun was already fierce and the air was thick with the buzz of insects. It was back-breaking work. The ground was hard, baked clay on top, and then a layer of sticky, smelly mud underneath. She dug for hours, sweat stinging her eyes, her muscles screaming in protest. She felt foolish, a lone woman digging a hole in the middle of nowhere. What was she even hoping to find? By late afternoon, she had managed to dig a hole a few feet deep. It wasn't much, and there was no sign of water, just more of that dark, oily-smelling mud. Discouraged and exhausted, she slumped to the ground, wiping her grimy face with the back of her hand. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. It was hopeless. The farm was doomed, and so was she. She was about to give up, to trudge back to the house and admit defeat when something caught her eye. In the mud she'd dug out, there was a strange shimmer, a rainbow sheen like oil on water, but thicker, darker. She poked at it with a stick. A glob of black, sticky stuff clung to the end. It smelled funny, a strong, pungent odor she didn't recognize. Curiosity, stronger than her exhaustion, made her look closer at the hole she'd dug. The mud at the bottom seemed darker, almost black, and it oozed slowly, sluggishly. It wasn't water. It was something else. She'd seen pictures in magazines, heard stories from travelers passing through redemption, tales of black gold, of oil, found in unexpected places, making poor folks rich overnight. But that was stuff that happened in faraway states like Texas or Oklahoma, not here in their quiet, dusty county. Could it be? Her heart began to pound, a mixture of disbelief and a wild, improbable hope. She scooped up a handful of the black, sticky mud. It was thick and heavy. She'd never seen anything like it on Willow Creek Farm before. All thoughts of water forgotten, Ellie scrambled up and ran back to the farmhouse as fast as her tired legs could carry her. She rummaged through an old trunk where her papa kept his books and papers. He'd been interested in geology, in the rocks and minerals of the land. She found an old dog-eared book about the geology of their state. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of oil. There wasn't much. Her region wasn't known for it. But there was a small paragraph, a footnote almost, mentioning that small, isolated deposits were theoretically possible in certain ancient shale formations that might exist deep underground, even in their area. It was a tiny sliver of possibility, but it was enough to ignite a fire in Ellie. What if? What if Jedediah's cursed ground was actually blessed? She didn't sleep that night. Her mind raced. The black, sticky stuff, The strange smell, the shimmer in the mud. Could it really be oil? And if it was, what did that mean? The next day, Ellie was back at the hole with her shovel, but this time with a new energy. She dug deeper, and the black ooze became more pronounced. It wasn't a gusher, not like in the moving pictures, but it was definitely there, seeping slowly from the earth. She filled an old jam jar with the thick, dark liquid. It looked like molasses, but it smelled like something powerful and raw. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself. She needed someone who knew about these things. But who could she trust? News like this, if it was true, could bring all sorts of trouble. People might try to take advantage of her. A lone woman with a potential fortune under her land. Jedediah's absence suddenly felt both a blessing and a curse. He wasn't here to interfere or waste it, but she also didn't have him to lean on or to help protect her. Not that he'd been much protection lately anyway. She thought of old Doc Miller in Redemption. He wasn't a medical doctor, but everyone called him Doc because he knew a little bit about everything. He'd been a school teacher once and was the closest thing their small town had to a learned man. He was old, kind, and most importantly, discreet. With the jam jar carefully wrapped in a cloth and tucked into her basket, Ellie hitched up their ancient mule Bess to the rickety cart. The journey to Redemption felt longer than usual, her mind buzzing with 1,000 questions and fears. What if Doc Miller laughed at her? What if it was just some strange kind of mud? Doc Miller lived in a small house at the edge of town, surrounded by books and strange contraptions. He listened patiently as Ellie, her voice trembling a little, told her story and showed him the jar. He took the jar, uncapped it, and sniffed cautiously. He rubbed a little of the substance between his fingers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't say anything for a long time, just looked from the jar to Ellie and back again. Finally, he looked up, his faded blue eyes surprisingly sharp. "Ellie," he said slowly, "I ain't no oil expert, mind you, but this," he sniffed it again, "this has the look and the smell of crude petroleum. Unrefined oil, straight from the earth." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "Oil? Really? Here?" "It's possible," Doc Miller said, a new excitement in his voice. "I've read about small, shallow deposits. Sometimes they can be found quite by accident. Tell me exactly where you found this." Ellie described the spot near the creek bed. Doc Miller nodded. "That land has always been a bit peculiar. Marshy, even in dry times. Could be there's a seep there." He looked at Ellie, a serious expression on his face. "Now, Ellie, if this is what I think it is, you need to be very careful. This could change your life, but it could also bring a heap of trouble. You need to get this tested properly, and you need to secure your mineral rights to this land, and quickly, before word gets out." Mineral rights. Ellie had never even thought about such a thing. She owned the land. Or rather, she. And Jedediah did, though mostly it felt like the bank owned it. Did that mean she owned whatever was underneath it too? Doc Miller explained. Usually the surface rights and mineral rights go together, unless they've been sold off separately in the past. You need to check the deed to your farm, and you need a lawyer, Ellie, a good one. Not just any town lawyer, but someone who understands this kind of thing. A lawyer. More expenses. But the hope that was now blooming in Ellie's chest was too strong to be dampened by such worries. If this was truly oil, real oil, then maybe, just maybe, she could pay off the debts, save the farm, save herself. Doc Miller knew a lawyer in the county seat, a man named Arthur Jenkins, who had some experience with land disputes and mining claims. He helped Ellie write a letter to Mr. Jenkins, explaining the situation and asking for advice. He also told her to keep her discovery a secret for now. "Don't tell a soul in Redemption, Ellie, not until you know what you're dealing with and your rights are protected. News like this can make people act foolish or greedy," Ellie promised. She thanked Doc Miller from the bottom of her heart, feeling a sense of gratitude so immense it almost brought tears to her eyes. He had listened to her, believed her, and given her a path forward. Driving Bess back to Willow Creek Farm, the world looked different. The dusty fields, the tired old farmhouse, even the relentless sun, seemed to hold a new kind of promise. Underneath all that dryness and despair, the earth held a secret, a rich, dark secret. And she, Ellie Cooper, a woman abandoned by her husband and left with nothing, had been the one to find it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of nervous anticipation and quiet activity. Ellie followed Doc Miller's advice to the letter. She spoke to no one about her discovery, though it was hard to contain the tremor of excitement that ran through her every time she looked at that jar of black liquid, now hidden safely under her bed. Mr. Arthur Jenkins, the lawyer from the county seat, responded to her letter with surprising speed. He was a portly man with a kind smile and shrewd eyes, and he drove out to Willow Creek Farm himself. Ellie, dressed in her cleanest, mended dress, nervously offered him coffee and told him her story again, this time with more detail, showing him the exact spot where she'd found the strange substance. Mr. Jenkins listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking a sharp question. He examined the samples Ellie had collected. Like Doc Miller, he wasn't an oil expert, but he agreed it was highly suggestive of petroleum. He spent a long time looking over the deed to the farm, which Ellie had found tucked away in Jedediah's messy desk. "Good news on this front, Mrs. Cooper," he said finally, tapping the old document. "The mineral rights were never separated. They belong to the owner of the land. That's you and your husband." Ellie's heart sank a little at the mention of Jedediah. What did this mean for him? If there was oil, did he have a claim to it too? Mr. Jenkins seemed to read her mind. "Your husband has abandoned you and the property, Mrs. Cooper. That has legal implications, especially concerning the debts against the farm. We need to be strategic about this." He explained that the first step was to get the substance properly analyzed. He knew a geologist in a bigger city who could do it. He also advised her to discreetly buy up any outstanding small debts or liens against the farm if she could, to consolidate her position before any news broke. He also suggested filing a legal notice of abandonment against Jedediah to further protect her interests in the property. It all sounded complicated and expensive. Ellie explained her financial situation, the looming bank loan. Mr. Jenkins nodded, sympathetically. "This will require some investment, Mrs. Cooper. But if this is indeed oil, the returns could be substantial." He offered to work on a contingency basis for some of his fees, meaning he'd get paid a percentage if and when the oil venture was successful. This was a lifeline for Ellie. He took samples of the dark ooze with him and promised to be in touch as soon as he heard from the geologist. He also cautioned her again about secrecy. "The moment word of a potential oil strike gets out, this land will be crawling with speculators and all sorts of characters. You need to be prepared." Waiting for news from the geologist was torture. Ellie tried to keep to her routine, tending her garden, looking after the chickens, but her mind was constantly on that patch of land by the creek. Every day, she'd walk out there, just to look at the hole she'd dug, which still slowly seeped the black, viscous fluid. It seemed like a magical thing, a gift from the earth itself. During this time, Ellie did something brave. She gathered the little money she had from selling eggs and vegetables and a few dollars she'd hidden away for a true emergency and went to see Mr. Blackwood at the bank. She proposed a small payment on the interest of the loan and asked for a little more time, hinting that she might have a way to improve the farm's prospects soon, though she didn't say how. Mr. Blackwood was skeptical, but he was also a businessman. A small payment was better than none, and perhaps her quiet determination impressed him. He agreed to a short extension, his stern face softening just a fraction. Then, one dusty Tuesday, a letter arrived from Mr. Jenkins. Ellie's hands trembled so much she could barely open it. It was short and to the point. The geologist had confirmed it. The substance from Willow Creek Farm was high-quality crude oil, a significant seep indicating a possible reservoir beneath her land. Ellie read the letter 3 times, then sank onto the porch steps, the paper clutched in her hand. It was true. It was really, truly oil. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of disbelief, of shock, of a wild, surging hope that was so powerful it almost took her breath away. She, Ellie Cooper, was sitting on a fortune. The news changed everything, and yet, for a little while, nothing on the surface seemed different. Ellie still fed her chickens, watered her garden, and lived her quiet, solitary life. But now, there was a secret humming. Beneath the surface of her days, a thrilling, terrifying secret. Mr. Jenkins moved quickly. He helped Ellie file the necessary claims and legal notices to secure her rights to the oil. He also started to discreetly contact small, independent oil companies, the kind that might be willing to take a chance on an unproven field and offer more. A fair deal to a landowner, rather than the giant corporations that might try to railroad her. The lawyer also advised her on how to deal with Jedediah's share. Since he had abandoned the property and the marriage, and left her with all the debts, Mr. Jenkins was confident they could legally ensure that the lion's share, if not all, of the benefits from the oil would go to Ellie, especially if used to clear the farm's joint debts first. This was a relief to Ellie, though a small part of her still felt a strange pang of something. Not love, not anymore, but perhaps a residue of the shared years, a sadness for what had been lost and what could never be recovered. The biggest challenge was keeping the secret. Redemption was a small town. Tongues wagged easily. Ellie became even more withdrawn, avoiding trips to town unless absolutely necessary. She knew people were talking about her, the poor abandoned wife, struggling alone on that wretched farm. Let them talk, she thought. Soon they might be talking about something else entirely. One day, a dusty car with out-of-state plates pulled up to Willow Creek Farm. Inside were two men in city clothes, looking hot and out of place. They introduced themselves as Mr. Ames and Mr. Stratton from a small oil exploration company Mr. Jenkins had contacted. They were polite, professional, and eager to see the seep. Ellie, with Mr. Jenkins by her side, he'd driven out as soon as he knew they were coming, led them to the spot by the creek. The men took samples, made measurements, and talked in low voices, using terms Ellie didn't understand. Anticline, caprock, porosity. But their excitement was visible. After several hours, they sat down with Ellie and Mr. Jenkins at her kitchen table. Mr. Ames, the older of the two, leaned forward. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, "we believe there's a very good chance you have a commercially viable oil deposit on your land. We're prepared to offer you a lease agreement. We'll drill an exploratory well at our expense. If we strike oil, you'll receive a landowner's royalty, a percentage of every barrel we pump out." He named a figure for the royalty. It sounded like a fortune to Ellie, who was used to counting pennies. Mr. Jenkins, however, calmly negotiated for a slightly higher percentage and better terms regarding land usage and restoration. Ellie listened, amazed at his skill, grateful to have him on her side. Finally, an agreement was reached. Ellie signed the papers, her hand steady. As the men left, promising to return with a drilling crew soon, Ellie felt a dizzying sense of unreality. It was happening. Her life was about to change in ways she could barely imagine. The arrival of the drilling rig a few weeks later was an event that Redemption would talk about for years. It came rumbling down the main street on huge trucks, a towering metal monster, unlike anything the town had ever seen. It turned onto the dusty track to Willow Creek Farm, and soon, the quiet solitude of Ellie's land was shattered by the clang of metal, the roar of engines, and the shouts of rough-looking men in overalls and hard hats. Ellie watched from her porch, a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension churning inside her. Her little farm was suddenly the center of intense activity. A rough camp was set up for the workers. Day and night, the drilling went on, the rhythmic thud of the drill bit pounding into the earth, deeper and deeper. Some folks from town drove out to gawk, their curiosity overcoming their usual routines. Mrs. Henderson, her neighbor, came over, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Ellie, child, what in tarnation is going on? Is it true what they're saying? You found oil?" Ellie, now that the official work had begun, could finally confirm the rumors. "It seems so, Mrs. Henderson." The older woman shook her head in amazement. "Well, I'll be. Jedediah always said this land was cursed. Looks like it was blessed all along, and he was just too blind to see it." The drilling went on for what felt like an eternity. There were days of hope and days of disappointment. The drill bit hit rock, got stuck, had to be pulled out and repaired. The oilmen were stoic, used to the uncertainties of their trade. Ellie prayed. She prayed for success, for a new beginning. And then, one hot, still afternoon, it happened. A new sound, a deep rumble from the earth, then a roar. A shout went up from the drilling crew. Ellie ran from the house, her heart pounding. She saw it, a dark geyser, a fountain of black liquid shooting high into the air from the top of the rig, then falling back to earth, drenching the ground, the machinery, and the cheering men. It was oil. Rich, black, gushing oil. Willow Creek Farm, the dry, dusty, forgotten place, had delivered its treasure. The gusher, later named Ellie's Luck. Number one was the talk of the state. Reporters came, photographers, more oilmen, land speculators, and people just looking for a piece of the excitement. Redemption was suddenly on the map. Willow Creek Farm, once a symbol of hardship, became a symbol of incredible, unexpected fortune. Ellie's life transformed overnight. The royalty checks started coming in, sums of money so large she could barely comprehend them. The first thing she did was pay off the loan at Mr. Blackwood's bank. She walked in, not as the desperate woman begging for time, but as Ellie Cooper, oil woman. Mr. Blackwood, for once, looked genuinely impressed, almost respectful. She then paid off all the other small debts Jedediah had left behind. With Mr. Jenkins's continued guidance, she invested her money wisely. She bought new, modern equipment for the parts of the farm she wanted to keep cultivating, not for cotton or corn, but for a large, thriving market garden and a bigger flock of healthy chickens. She hired Mrs. Henderson's son, young Tom, who was a good worker, to help her. She had the old farmhouse repaired and painted, a cheerful yellow with white trim. She even had a proper indoor bathroom installed, a luxury she'd only dreamed of. But the money also brought new challenges. Distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years suddenly appeared, looking for handouts. Salesmen pestered her with all sorts of schemes. And then, there was Jedediah. News of the oil strike at Willow Creek Farm traveled far and wide. One day, months after the first gusher, the old truck, looking even more battered than before, sputtered back up the dirt track. Jedediah was behind the wheel. He looked older, more worn out, and his eyes didn't have that old spark of boundless optimism. They just looked tired and a little desperate. He found Ellie on the porch of her newly painted house, overseeing Tom Henderson unload supplies. She wasn't the timid, downtrodden woman he had left behind. She was dressed in a smart, practical dress. Her hair was neatly done, and there was an air of quiet confidence about her. "Ellie," he said, his voice uncertain. I heard the news. About the oil, our oil." Ellie looked at him calmly. "Hello, Jedediah. It's my oil, my farm. But we're married, Ellie. What's yours is mine, isn't it? We can be rich together. All those dreams we had." Ellie stood up. She had thought about this moment, dreaded it, prepared for it. Mr. Jenkins had already handled the legalities. The farm, thanks to his work regarding the abandonment and the debts Jedediah had left her solely responsible for, was now legally hers, along with its mineral rights. Jedediah had forfeited his claims when he walked out. "Your dreams, Jedediah, always involved you leaving," she said, her voice steady, without anger, just a simple statement of fact. "You left me with nothing but debts and a broken heart. I built this. I found this after you said this land was worthless. I faced the hardship alone. The fortune belongs to the person who persevered, not the one who ran away." Jedediah protested, pleaded, even tried to charm her with glimpses of the old Jedediah. But Ellie was no longer susceptible to his empty promises. She saw him now for what he was, a weak man who had run away from responsibility and had only returned when he smelled money. She didn't shout or cause a scene. She simply told him, "Mr. Jenkins, my lawyer, has all the papers, Jedediah. There's nothing for you here. You made your choice when you drove away that morning." She did, however, out of a flicker of pity for the broken man he had become, and perhaps to finally close that chapter of her life, offer him a small sum of money, enough for him to get a fresh start, a real one this time, somewhere far away. Not a fortune, but more than he had left her with. Enough so he couldn't say she left him with nothing. He took the money, his eyes downcast, and left as quietly as he had arrived. Ellie watched him go, and this time she felt nothing but a sense of release. That part of her life was truly over. Ellie Cooper became a respected figure in the county. She wasn't just Ellie who got lucky. She was known as a smart businesswoman. She invested in more wells on her property, working closely with Mr. Ames and Mr. Stratton, who proved to be honest partners. She used her wealth thoughtfully. She helped refurbish the little schoolhouse in Redemption, donated to build a small clinic, and provided loans to other struggling farmers who had good ideas but bad luck. Loans with fair terms, not like the ones that had almost broken her. She never remarried. She had found a contentment and independence she cherished. Her farm, Willow Creek, once a symbol of despair, was now a place of life and prosperity. The oil derrick stood tall in one section, symbols of her incredible fortune. But in another, her market garden bloomed, and her chickens clucked happily, symbols of her enduring connection to the land itself. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, Ellie would sit on her porch, now wide and sturdy, and look out over her land. She would remember the dust, the despair, the loneliness, and she would remember the glint of black in the mud, the moment that changed everything. She had faced the worst life could throw at her, and had not only survived but had triumphed. The earth had given her a gift, but it was her own courage, her own resilience, her own refusal to give up, that had truly made her rich. Eliza May Cooper, the abandoned wife, had found her fortune not in a man, not in a dream chased by someone else, but deep within herself, and in the surprising heart of the land she called home, and that, she knew, was the greatest treasure of all.